Today, I'm going to talk to you about the best practices in communicating about climate change. So I am the director of One Climate Action, which is a business for good, a social impact company, if you will. We train people to communicate effectively about climate change in conversations and online. And one thing I'd like to get off my chest right away is that I am not a climate scientist. My expertise is in communications and persuasion applied to climate change. So I'm not going to talk about the science of climate change, but I will teach you how to talk about it. And then during my presentation, there will be time for you to prepare an action plan for your FOCO club. So please get paper and pen ready. And at the end, there will be time for questions. And finally, what I'd love for you to do is just enjoy the presentation, which is one of the reasons why there's confetti on each slide. All right, so let's jump into it. What do I mean by communicating about climate change? The communications principles I'm going to teach you can be applied to a lot of different situations. For instance, in informal and formal conversations, on any social media platform, on any of your FOCO club's social media profiles, websites, or other communications tools, and also when speaking, when doing public speaking. And so you might be wondering, why do we need to have a whole presentation on this topic? So climate scientist Katharine Hayhoe wrote a book, which you see on the screen, called Saving Us. And the subtitle is great: A Climate Scientist's Case for Hope and Healing in a Divided World. This book is fantastic, and she does make a case for hope, which I deeply appreciate. She provides easy to understand information about how to talk about climate change. And here's a quote from the introduction of her book. "The single most important thing that anyone can do is bring people together around climate change. To bring people together around climate change is the very thing we fear most. Talk about it." In fact, her whole book is based on this premise: the need to talk about climate change in order to solve the climate crisis. And I deeply agree with her. It needs to feel normal to bring up topics related to climate change. And in order to put large-scale climate solutions in place, we need more people to support those solutions. Support will come when more people start talking about climate change. And so I'll show you exactly how this happens. But first, let's take a quick look about individual carbon footprints to help contextualize the use and importance of climate conversations. All right, so we're going to talk about climate footprints and emissions. The World Inequality Lab did an analysis of several countries around the world. And here you see France on the left and the US on the right with this bar graph. And this report found that people with the highest incomes, which you see in red, had the biggest carbon footprints. These are the people with the top 10% of all incomes in that country. The middle 40% of incomes are shown in orange, and the bottom 50% of incomes are shown in green. And what you see, hopefully you see a very faint red line across the bottom, which is the goal to get the entire human population to only have 2 tons of carbon emissions per year. And so we're quite far away from those 2-ton goals. The bottom income individuals and households are very close in both France and the US, or pretty close. But the middle and top earners are pretty far away from that. And so what I want to talk to you first about is voluntary actions, individual actions to reduce one's individual carbon footprint. Because I think it gives some context around this topic of talking about climate change. So there are a ton of how-to guides published about climate actions that individuals can take in their personal lives. And during the Q&A, if you'd like to talk more about them, I'm happy to go there. But what I'd like to show you here is a calculation of the potential impact of voluntary actions, right? Not obligatory, but just people choosing of their own free will. And this comes from a report published by the French nonprofit Carbon 4. And so on this slide, you have a circle broken up into 3 parts. In green, lifestyle choices that are financially accessible. In blue, investments by home and car owners, renovations of the heating system and insulation, and changing to an electric vehicle. And then in red, emissions reductions by government, all public sector institutions, and businesses. Basically, the collective. You might include in here academic institutions, right? Anyone that is not an individual. So let's focus on the green area for now. Carbon 4, this nonprofit that did the research study, identified a set of 10 financially accessible lifestyle changes that reduce one's individual carbon footprint. These changes include a vegetarian diet, taking a bike for short distances instead of the car, and not flying. Looking just at France for their study, their initial analysis suggested that if the entire French population, so every single person in France, volunteered on their own free will to adopt these 10 lifestyle changes, this would decrease France's overall carbon footprint by 25% in a perfect scenario. You can see that number in the green bubble. However, due to financial constraints and basic human psychology and behavioral science, we cannot expect every human to willingly change all 10 of these on their own accord. In their study, Carbon 4 took this analysis a step further, and they incorporated a nuanced understanding of human behavior. Their analysis indicates that this perfect scenario is not realistic. So watch the green part of the donut as I change the slide. In reality, voluntary lifestyle choices can only reduce France's carbon footprint by around 5 to 10%. Okay, so there are 2 big takeaways from this, this outcome. First, relates to the impact of individual lifestyle changes. It might seem disappointing, moving from 25% to 5 to 10%. However, a 5 to 10% reduction in emissions is significant. For example, we'd all love a 10% raise on our salaries or our retirement incomes, right? 10% is important. And these 10 lifestyle choices are financially accessible choices. So anybody could potentially implement them. And that's a good thing. There is potential there for a substantial reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from individual lifestyle changes. But remember, the most wealthy people in any country have the biggest carbon footprints. So we cannot put the responsibility of emissions reductions on the shoulders of the average person, which leads me to the second big takeaway. The second important thing to learn from this study is that the impact that the collective, that part on red, that the collective has on the carbon footprint of any country cannot be understated. By collective, we mean public sector, government, industry, agriculture, heating, gas, electricity, and other businesses and institutions. Let's look more closely at this. It's estimated that 75% of all emissions reductions from individual actions are influenced or facilitated by the government. And just to clarify, when I say the government, I'm talking about the entire public sector, from local to regional to national public agencies and public institutions. In other words, regular individuals cannot solve the climate crisis alone. They need help from the public sector in the form of laws, public policies, and subsidies. Meanwhile, the government has a responsibility to make this transition easy, fair, and affordable for the average person. In conclusion, individual action is important and necessary, but the public sector can offer the levers that help individuals take even greater action. Governments at the local, regional, and national levels also exert their power over businesses through investment decisions, infrastructure projects, public policy, and market regulations. Basically, governments are capable of reducing the friction. So it's possible for people and businesses to reduce emissions. This, of course, is part of a circular feedback loop because lobbying has a huge influence over government. And in many societies around the world, individuals also have a significant power over the actions of the government. And so my question to you is, who makes up every single business, public sector, and industry in the world? Individuals. Individuals are the ones making decisions in both governments and businesses. And through informal and formal conversations about climate change, individuals can impact other people, including people in government and business. Imagine if more people were supportive of governments and businesses taking climate action. That is possible by talking more about climate change. So what I'd like to show you here is a visual representation of the impact of climate conversations and any effective climate communication. This is based on behavior science research by Climate Outreach, a research institute in the UK, and political analysis published in the recent book, Earth for All. When more people have conversations about climate change in empathetic and compassionate ways, several things happen. First, when we initiate more conversations about climate change, we are making it feel more normal for other people to talk about the topic. Second, the method I'll show you today helps people recognize their self-interests are at stake. People start to see that climate action is aligned with their identity and what they value most. Third, when we focus on solutions, more people see a clear path that is available today. This is one of the essential ingredients in any process of change. So with these three shifts in place, the domino effect starts to take off. New people see their role in climate action. New people have conversations about climate change. Some people speak out publicly, whether that be online, with the news media, or with public officials and with businesses. More people make lifestyle changes. And finally, more people start to vote for candidates who are climate heroes. And as a result of all of this, even more people care about climate action, climate heroes get elected, and elected and public officials feel pressure. And from there, governments implement policies and invest in infrastructure that facilitate and enable individuals and businesses to reduce their carbon dioxide emissions and reliance on fossil fuels. Then, governments create regulations that specifically incentivize businesses to take action. And finally, these collective actions enable massive reduction in greenhouse gas emissions and help communities be better prepared to respond to the impacts of global heating. So now that you can see the importance of talking about climate change, let's talk about the best ways to communicate. Ultimately, conversations about climate change come into play in both influencing individuals and influencing governments and businesses. Talking about climate change is a central lever for climate action. It's also an action individuals can take that can have a very significant impact through the ripple effect. Okay, now that you have seen the value of communicating about climate change, let's dive into some specifics. I'd like to start by exploring some of the common errors in climate communications, and then discuss the motivators that bring people on board to support climate solutions. So first, the errors. There are 4 tactics today that are being used by journalists, large climate change nonprofits, and scientists that are actually pushing people away from supporting climate action. We know these errors exist because climate psychologists and behavioral science experts have studied the best and worst of climate communications. According to climate psychologist Renee Lertzman, for example, the way people talk about climate change today makes people turn away rather than turning toward supporting climate solutions. And so before I start listing these errors, I want to assure you that the communications tips that I talk about today are specifically designed to overcome these errors. So here's the first of the common errors to avoid when bringing up climate change. Focus on the science. Now, let me be clear. Facts are important, and we need researchers and journalists to report on the facts about the science of climate change. But, and this may seem trivial, the main reason why it's problematic to focus on the science is that it's boring. Most people are completely turned off by the science of climate change. They don't want to read the content or attend the event or watch the video. They'd rather watch videos of cats and kittens doing cute things. Now I'm talking about the general public here. What this means is that, and I include myself in the general public, I love watching cats and kittens do cute things in videos online. So what I'm trying to say here is that when we focus on the science in our communications, whether that be in a conversation or online, we will be unlikely to change anyone's mind or inspire anyone to take action. So this is the first error. The second error is when the focus is on polar bears or catastrophes 50 years in the future. Frequently, climate communications focuses on threats of climate change that are far in the future, affecting future generations or far away in some other part of the world. This creates something called psychological distance. And so the reason why this is a pitfall to avoid is because when problems seem so far away from me or not relevant to my life today, they don't feel urgent to address. And this leads to inaction. People who perceive climate change to be far away have difficulty taking any kind of action because it feels like a sacrifice to be made for other people or places. In the same way that donating one's blood is important, but it's an act for others, not for oneself. So when we speak of climate threats as unrelated to our personal lives, we have near zero motivation to do anything about it. The third error is that when people are at the beginning of their climate action journey, making people feel that they will need to make a huge personal sacrifice can turn them off. The work of Daniel Kahneman, author of Thinking Fast and Slow, explains that humans are greatly motivated to avoid loss. In other words, we want to keep the advantages and the objects we currently have, and we as humans are highly motivated to protect those advantages and objects. By focusing your communication on dramatic lifestyle changes, the person you want to influence may reject the whole conversation. Now, it is very important that more people know which individual actions greatly reduce emissions. However, for people at the beginning of their climate action journey, focusing your communications here will likely turn them off. So that's the third error. Before I tell you the fourth error, I'd like to show you a quote. In her book that I mentioned earlier, climate scientist Katharine Hayhoe wrote, "Bad news warnings are more likely to make people check out than change their behavior." What she means is, when climate change messages evoke fear, the typical human response can include shutting down, not listening, denial, anger, despair, or hopelessness. So human psychology tells us that these reactions are a natural part of the flight, fright, freeze, or fawn reactions to stress. So the fourth error is focusing on the very scary threats and catastrophes that are causing global heating. Now, this might seem surprising since many politicians and media outlets use fear to influence people's opinions on a variety of topics, from immigration to police reform. And personally, I have a visceral reaction when immigration and police reform come up because my brain has been trained to associate these topics with fear. And although fear-based messaging does work to persuade people on many political topics, for climate change, we need to be careful about using fear. So let's talk about this a little bit more. First, solely triggering someone's fear about climate change can lead them to reject any thought about taking a climate action. However, you can be successful in your communications if you combine a small amount of fear with easily actionable solutions that are accessible today. In addition, keep in mind that when people feel fear, this triggers feelings of solitude. And so to combat that psychological reaction, the best bet is to talk about what groups are doing and how the person you're speaking with can join a group to take action. So the best practices in climate communication are based on human behavior and motivation. So what I'd like to do is discuss what does motivate people to support climate action. Now, like I said, I'm not a climate scientist. But on the next slides, I'm going to show you some photos of recent extreme weather events that scientists claim were aggravated by climate change. They all took place in the United States, our common country of origin. And it's important to discuss these catastrophic weather events because they help us understand some fundamental motivations for supporting climate action. Knowing people's motivations will help us create better climate communications. First and foremost, as humans, we care about personal health and safety. And our health is threatened by droughts, heat waves, and wildfires. These photos are from Maui and New York. Human safety, our homes, our towns are also threatened by worsening hurricanes and floods. And these two photos are from Florida. Finally, we also care about food access and the cost of food, which increases whenever farmers struggle with their crops. Harvests have become threatened by drought, food, heat, and diseases. These two photos are from Texas and Iowa. So I have two primary reasons why I am showing you these slides. First, of course, I'd like for everyone to grasp the gravity of the situation. And these photos are quite moving and demonstrate the very real threats to our own lives and well-being. Second, we've all seen these photos of polar bears starving, but that gives us the idea that the threats are far away, affecting only nature. However, climate change poses very real threats to humans and things very close to us: family, neighbors, farmers that produce our food, and our very homes. And finally, the climate crisis is already here today. It's not a faraway event that might happen in 100 years. It's important that we all see that the threats are here and now. The second key takeaway from these disturbing images is something that might sound surprising. Nobody cares about climate change. You might say, but what about all those climate strikes and the scientists and you, Tammy? And I would argue that even those people and me fundamentally do not care about climate change. So what do they care about? Well, thinking back to the slides I just showed you, climate change is threatening human life, our homes, our towns, and our food supply, to name a few. So here's what people do care about. Our personal needs, like having a safe home, having food to eat, our personal budget. We care about other people, like our children, for example. And as members of FACO, we likely care about women and girls, Indigenous people, and people in poverty. What you see in the list on the right are some of the motivators for taking climate action, all of which relate to the threats evoked in the previous slides. So one important note to consider is that some people may feel their home and family are not at risk. So they may not be motivated to care about climate change in this way that I have shown you. So on the next slide, I'll show you some more motivators that can lead people to support climate action. So for example, seabirds and sea turtles. I know you had a speaker today talk about seabirds and the climate impact. Some people are deeply passionate about seabirds or sea turtles or other animals, and so they jump in because they care about those animals. Also, the natural world, places that are beautiful that we want to conserve. Also, gardening is impacted by climate change. Winter sports, People want to protect winter sports, and so they start to get active about climate action. Some people are motivated by having reliable access to electricity for homes, businesses, hospitals, and important infrastructure. We want better jobs and more high quality jobs. We want clean air. And some people will switch to riding a bike instead of driving to work because of a personal health crisis that has led them to need to add more exercise in their life. We want improved well-being. We want a slower pace of life. We want more free time with the family. And then some people are motivated exclusively not by any of these other things, but they will be motivated by shame or peer pressure. And then some people deeply identify with their group or community. That could be political, religious, philosophical, what have you. And in her book, Catherine Heo makes the case for Christians to take climate action. And then some people are only motivated by laws and regulations that force them to take action. Even the most well-known climate activists are not motivated by climate change alone. They're likely scared of the threats of climate change and the potential danger to the people, places, and interests they hold dear. So when applying this information that I've just presented to you to climate change communications, it's important to remember that we can only motivate people in ways that align with their values, which may be different from the values we hold ourselves. So, keeping in mind everything I've presented to you so far, I'd like you to reflect on two questions. You'll keep your answers to yourself and use the answers to guide your personal action plan that we'll talk about in a few slides. So please get out a piece of paper and pen. Hopefully you're getting that ready. The first question is, what motivates you to take action with regard to climate change? So really internally think about yourself. Are you motivated? What has motivated you? What has brought you to think that it's an important topic? And so this is a period to free write. The best bet is to keep writing for the whole 2 minutes. I'm gonna give you 2 minutes. And you could even ramble if you don't know what to write. Explore different ideas. Everything you write is for your eyes only. Okay, so the red bar that you see on the screen will shrink in size as the time goes by. And so this is to help you know how much time is left. Ready? And you might hear a sound at the end, but I'm not sure if the sound is hooked up from my side. So begin. Okay, time is up. So now what I'd like you to do is answer just one more question. For the second question, please list out the best possible outcomes if you could be successful at talking about climate change. And talking about climate change could be in conversations, it could be online, it could be within your club. So what would be the best possible scenario if you were to be successful? Again, this is a free write. Please keep writing for the whole 2 minutes, even if you're rambling and you're not sure what to say. So again, everything is for your eyes only. You have 2 minutes. And if you're ready, please start. Okay, time is up. Thank you so much for taking the time to reflect. This time to think about your role and the actions you take is important for integrating the ideas that I've shared and setting you up for your next steps. So I'd like you to use your answers to help you guide your action plan for climate communications, which we'll talk about in just a couple slides. Putting this all into practice, let's go. I'd like for you to keep some ideas in mind as you use social media. Okay, so these are some tips, specific tips that I'd like you to consider when you're using your own social media account or when you're working on the social media accounts for your clubs. So first, what you like and engage with on social media platforms matters. The algorithm actually recognizes that you have engaged with the material. And by engagement, I mean like, comment, or share. Any kind of reaction to a post, the algorithm does two things. First, it shows that same post to more people. And then second, it shows similar posts to you. So the more you like or comment on catastrophic news, the more you will see similar news in your feed. And the more you like or comment on catastrophic news, the more others on that same social media platform will see catastrophic news. That's how the algorithm works. So since this type of news, catastrophic news, triggers feelings of fear, which causes inaction, it's best to avoid posting or engaging with this type of content online. Next, I want to give you some principles of climate communications. Now, you'll recognize what I'm about to say because it's based on all of my previous presentation, but now you understand why these principles exist, right? So if you talk about climate change in informal conversations or within your clubs, there are 3 principles that I'd like you to follow. First, focus your words on the topics or topic that really matters to people. those elements listed on the slides where I listed all the different values and the motivators for action, focus on those topics and do not put climate change at the heart of the dialogue. Second, if you mention extreme weather events or the impacts of climate change, focus on the specific threats that are present here today and not the threats we face in 50 or 100 years. Okay, so like the photos that I showed you today are recent. And so that's something that you could talk about, whereas you should avoid trying to talk about things that are being predicted for the future. Third, if you mention climate threats in the future, only mention those that relate to the topics that the person cares most about. So if that person cares deeply about seabirds, focus on seabirds rather than focusing on, for example, chocolate, because that's threatened by climate change as well. And I have another tip for you that is sort of new. I mentioned it a little bit in previous slides, but I didn't go into detail. And that is to focus on the solutions that are already available today. And I have a suggestion for you that I'll share on the next slide as to how you can put all of this together into a communications package, so to speak. Okay. So here's an idea of how you can put this all together in a sort of tangible, concrete way. First, focus on your local town or region, so keep it very local. Next, highlight the stories of real people who are doing things. So this will be the human interest element. So what are they doing? Talk about these people. And then focus on the solutions that these people are putting into place. And then finally, provide the specific details that people need in order to join the group that is working on that solution. Okay. And so this can look like podcast episodes. It can look like blog posts. It can look like posts on social media. And so the more we share stories about real people, we can grab the interest of our audience. And the more we focus on solutions, the more we have hope and the more we're likely to engage in climate action. So this is a possible campaign that you could take back to your club and invite, if you are not the communications person, invite the communications person in your club, or invite the FACO representative or someone else who might be interested in this kind of topic to take this campaign forward. And then where could you apply this information? So if you don't apply it specifically in your clubs, which is the third bullet on this slide, you could apply this information in conversations, you could apply it on social media, and then in presentations, and you could also create an event, which would be perhaps in the book club or the youth programming, or just connected to any kind of activity that the club members really enjoy. So your action plan. This is the last step of this presentation. What I'd like you to do is decide what actions you're committing to and the baby steps that you're going to take. And there's a second question that's going to appear that I want you to also consider, and you'll have 2 minutes for both questions. All right. And just like before, I'll let you know when time is up, and it's a free write, and the answers are only for you. Here we go. The second question is now up on the slide. Okay, so that's the 2 minutes. I hope that you've been able to write something that sounds coherent and you're ready to take the next step and bring these ideas forward into your life or possibly into your club. So just to wrap up, before we answer any questions, I'd like to share some training programs that I have coming up that you could join or others in your network could join. At One Climate Action, we have 3 types of training programs that help people feel more confident having climate conversations and avoid pushing people away from supporting climate action. The first program is called Talk Climate, and it's focused on informal conversations. The next programs will take place in November this year. And then the second program is called Climate Communications, and the focus is on creating campaigns for a wider audience, just like what I suggested you might do with your FACO clubs. And so there's going to be a pilot program this fall, sort of beta testing that program, and then the official program will launch in next year. And the third program is called Career Boost, with a focus on helping job seekers with their CVs, cover letters, networking, and preparing for interviews. And there will be a free panel discussion in December. And the date is going to be at the beginning, but we haven't decided exactly when. So all the details and registration are on the website, which is at the bottom of the slide. So at that, thank you very much for hearing me out. And I'd love to hear the questions that have come up for you.